Alpha King saw Omega struggling with spilled wine and asked why the room reeked of fear, not wine. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our story. Emily Green, an Omega in the court of Alpha King Alexander Blackthorn, stood in the grand hall of the royal palace, her heart racing in her chest. The laughter of the other wolves around her felt distant, their voices blending with the music and chatter that filled the room. The crystal chandeliers above sparkled like diamonds, casting a warm glow over the gathering. The nobles and dignitaries from various packs moved in elegant circles, their eyes glittering with ambition. But none of that mattered to Emily. She was invisible to them, nothing more than a forgotten soul, overlooked and dismissed. She had always known she didn't belong in their world of power and dominance. As an Omega, she was expected to serve, to remain in the background, unnoticed and unheard. And tonight, that bitter reality was more evident than ever. A sharp voice broke through her thoughts. Watch where you're going, Omega. A sudden force shoved her sideways, and she stumbled, spilling the glass of wine in her hand across the polished floor. The deep red liquid splashed onto the delicate gown of Lady Evelyn, a prominent noblewoman from a neighboring pack. Evelyn's face twisted with disgust as she looked down at the stain. You filthy creature, she sneered, her voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. Can't even hold a simple glass of wine. The laughter that followed stung Emily's ears. Her face burned with humiliation, her hands trembling as she tried to apologize. But the words caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to disappear, but the eyes of the crowd were upon her, their judgment unyielding. She could feel the weight of their scorn, each whisper slicing through her like a blade. I am sorry, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She reached down to wipe up the spilled wine, but as she bent over, a sharp pain surged through her chest. The room seemed to spin, and she suddenly felt smaller than ever, more insignificant than she had ever felt in her life. Just as she was about to collapse from the weight of the stairs, a deep, commanding voice cut through the air, silencing the crowd. What is going on here? All eyes turned to the entrance. There, standing tall and regal, was Alpha King Alexander Blackthorn. His piercing gray eyes swept over the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. He moved with an elegance and power that made the air around him feel thick with authority. Emily's heart skipped a beat as his gaze landed on her. His sharp, calculating eyes studied her for a moment before narrowing, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Why does this room reek of fear and not wine? He asked, his voice low but strong. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Emily forgot how to breathe. His gaze never left her, his intense stare cutting through the tension like a knife. It was as if he could see straight into her soul, understanding her deepest fears and vulnerabilities. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the nobles whispering amongst themselves. Alexander's eyes flicked to Lady Evelyn, who stood frozen, her face paling under the weight of his scrutiny. Is this how we treat our own, Lady Evelyn? Alexander's tone was cold, and the room fell deathly silent. Evelyn, caught in the Alpha King's gaze, opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Emily stood motionless, unsure of what was happening. She had never imagined the Alpha King would intervene on her behalf. It was like a dream, one she feared would vanish the moment she dared to believe it was real. But the truth was undeniable. Alpha King Alexander Blackthorn had just defended her, and in that moment, she felt something shift deep inside her, a sense of hope, no matter how small. She was no longer invisible. She had been seen, and for the first time in her life, she wondered what it would be like to be more than just an Omega. What if, just maybe, she had a place in this world after all? The room remained eerily silent after Alpha King Alexander Blackthorn's words. His gaze, cold and unwavering, shifted from Lady Evelyn back to Emily, who still stood frozen in place. The weight of the room's stares was unbearable, but for some reason, Emily felt a strange sense of relief. The Alpha King had spoken for her, and in that moment, It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. She no longer felt invisible, no longer like a mere shadow in the court of wolves. His presence was commanding, his authority undeniable, and for the first time, Emily wondered if there was more to her life than being the overlooked Omega. Her pulse quickened as he began to move toward her, the crowd parting before him like the sea before a mighty storm. His eyes were locked on hers, and for a brief second, she thought she saw a flicker of something softer beneath his cold exterior. The Alpha King stopped just a few feet away from her, towering over her with his imposing frame. His silver eyes glinted in the low light, and his strong, commanding presence seemed to fill the entire room. The nobles were still, waiting for his next move. Emily couldn't speak, her mind racing, heart pounding in her chest. What was happening? Why had he stood up for her? Why was he even looking at her this way? His gaze softened for the briefest moment, and then, to Emily's surprise, he reached out and gently touched her arm, his fingers warm against her skin. "You're not invisible, Emily," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, though still laced with authority. "You matter." Emily's breath caught in her throat, the words echoing in her mind. For so long, she had been nothing more than a discarded Omega, a creature of little worth in the eyes of the pack. But here, in this moment, she felt seen. The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. She mattered. She wasn't just the quiet, forgotten girl in the corner anymore. She was someone, and Alpha King Alexander Blackthorne had just acknowledged that. The room remained still as she struggled to process what had just happened. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, and though she wanted to speak, no words came. Alexander, sensing her hesitation, gave her a small, reassuring smile before turning back to the rest of the room. "I expect an apology to be made," he commanded, his voice cold but firm. "And I will be keeping a close eye on the treatment of my Omega from here on out." The nobles, who had once looked down on Emily, now looked away, ashamed of their actions. The whispers of gossip and scorn that had filled the room earlier now fell silent. Emily could feel the change in the air, the shift in the dynamics of the room. She was no longer the target of ridicule. She was no longer the Omega who could be dismissed and forgotten. Alpha King had claimed her in his own way, and with it, he had given her something she never thought she would have: respect. As the crowd began to disperse, Emily remained standing where she was, her heart still racing. She had been given a new sense of worth, a new identity. But what would happen next? Would the Alpha King truly stand by her, or was this just a fleeting moment of kindness that would soon be forgotten? The uncertainty lingered, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't invisible anymore. And as she watched Alexander make his way through the crowd, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something far greater than she could ever have imagined. The next morning, the palace seemed different to Emily. It was as if the very air she breathed had changed overnight, thick with possibility and uncertainty. She walked through the halls, her footsteps light, but her mind was heavy with the events of the night before. The way Alpha King Alexander Blackthorne had defended her in front of the entire court still lingered in her mind, a mix of disbelief and awe. She had never imagined that someone like him, so powerful and revered, would stand up for her. She was just an Omega, after all, the lowest rank in the pack. And yet, Alexander had treated her with a level of respect she had never known. It was confusing, but it also gave her a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in years. Emily hadn't had time to process everything fully, but something had shifted in her. As she made her way to the dining hall, she couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building inside her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she might have a place in it. As she entered the dining hall, she noticed the usual chatter and clinking of silverware, but today, the atmosphere felt different. People were speaking in hushed tones, casting occasional glances toward her. It was subtle, but Emily could feel the shift. They were no longer laughing behind her back, no longer mocking her. There was respect in their eyes now, a quiet acknowledgement that had never been there before. She sat at her usual spot, at the far end of the table, still trying to adjust to the sudden change. She was about to reach for a piece of bread when a voice broke through her thoughts. "You look like you're still waking up, Emily." She turned to find a familiar face, Lila, one of the few Omega women who had always been kind to her. Lila smiled warmly, her eyes soft with understanding. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly things can change, Lila said. Emily nodded, her throat tight. She had been trying to understand everything that had happened. The night before, Alpha King Alexander had spoken up for her, but she hadn't had the chance to speak to him since. She wasn't sure what he wanted from her, or if he had done it out of some sense of duty. But there was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her feel like she mattered. Do you think it will last? Emily asked quietly, not looking directly at Lila. Lila raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. Of course, it will, she said with certainty. When the Alpha King speaks, people listen. And when he defends someone, they're not easily forgotten. Emily glanced up at her, her heart racing at the thought. Could it really be that simple? Could Alexander have meant what he said when he declared that she mattered? But what about the others? Emily asked. The rest of the pack, they still see me as weak. Lila reached across the table and gave Emily's hand a reassuring squeeze. They'll come around. People are quick to judge, but they're even quicker to change their minds when they see power at work. And if the Alpha King sees something in you, then that's all that matters. Emily took a deep breath, absorbing Lila's words. She had always been the outsider, the one who wasn't good enough to belong, but now she had a glimmer of hope. Maybe she could prove herself. Maybe she could show them all that she was more than just a weak Omega. Just as Emily was about to respond, the doors to the hall opened, and a hush fell over the room. Everyone turned to look as Alpha King Alexander Blackthorn entered, his presence filling the space. His eyes immediately found Emily's, and for a brief moment, their gazes locked. He nodded toward her, a slight but meaningful gesture, before continuing to his seat at the head of the table. The tension in the room shifted again, and Emily could feel the eyes of the nobles on her. The Alpha King had acknowledged her, and that was enough to change everything. She sat straighter, her heart beating a little faster. There was something about Alexander that made her feel seen, something that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could finally have a place in this world. As the meal went on, Emily couldn't help but steal glances at him. He was deep in conversation with the other alphas, but his occasional glances in her direction sent a flutter through her chest. She wasn't sure what was happening between them, but it felt like the beginning of something new, something important. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. Emily barely heard the conversations around her, her mind occupied with the thoughts of Alexander's gaze, his words, and what they might mean for her future. When the meal was over, she stood to leave, but before she could make her way toward the exit, Alexander's voice stopped her. Emily, stay for a moment, he said, his tone calm but firm. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning toward her. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned to face him. Yes, Your Majesty, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander gestured for her to come closer. I'd like to speak with you, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she moved toward him. She had no idea what he wanted, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the weight of her Omega status. She felt like she might actually be able to stand on equal ground with him. The room fell into a heavy silence as Emily approached. The Alpha King. She could feel the weight of the eyes around her, all watching, waiting for what would come next. She had never felt so exposed, yet there was a strange sense of calm settling within her as she stood before him. Alpha King Alexander Blackthorn looked up at her, his silver eyes sharp and unyielding, yet there was something in his gaze that softened her nerves. He motioned for her to sit, and Emily hesitated for just a moment before lowering herself into the chair across from him. The table between them felt wide, but in that moment, it felt like the distance between them was closing, piece by piece. Emily, he said, his voice steady and deep. You've been in the pack for a long time, yet I don't think I truly know you. His words hung in the air, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. He was right. She had always been the forgotten one, the one who stayed in the background, unnoticed. I've never been the type to stand out, she admitted, looking down at her hands in her lap. It's just who I am. Alexander leaned forward, his expression hard to read. I don't believe that's all there is to you, he said, his tone laced with curiosity. I saw something last night. Something I didn't expect. Emily looked up, meeting his gaze. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful. You're not like the others, Emily. You may not have the strength of an alpha, but there's a quiet power in you that's undeniable. You have something that the rest of them don't see, but I do. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her this way before, not with such directness and admiration. She was used to being overlooked, to being seen as weak and inconsequential. But here, in front of him, it felt like she was finally being seen for who she truly was. I don't understand, she stammered. I've always been just an Omega. Nothing special. Alexander's gaze softened as he stood and walked around the table to stand beside her. Being an Omega doesn't define you, Emily, he said, his voice low and reassuring. You have more to offer than you know. And I believe it's time you see that for yourself. The words hung in the air like a promise, and Emily's heart raced as she tried to process them. She had always believed her worth was tied to her status as an Omega, but the way Alexander spoke made her question everything she had ever known. She had always been afraid of what others might think of her, of being seen as weak or insignificant. But now, in the presence of the Alpha King, those fears felt less important. Alexander was offering her something she had never dared to hope for, an opportunity to prove herself. But what did that mean for her? What would happen if she took the chance to step into the light, to show the world that she was more than just an Omega? She didn't know, but the thought of it filled her with both excitement and fear. Alexander seemed to sense her uncertainty and placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Take your time, Emily. I'm not asking you to make a decision now. But know this, you are capable of more than you think. And I will be here, guiding you, every step of the way. His words were both a reassurance and a challenge, and Emily felt her heart swell with something new, hope. She had never considered the possibility of standing alongside someone like Alexander, of being more than just a servant in the eyes of the pack. But now, as she looked at him, she saw something in him that she had never seen before, a genuine desire to help her grow, to help her find her place in this world. For the first time, Emily felt like she might have a future here, one that wasn't dictated by her Omega status. The weight of the past few years lifted off her shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was finally free to choose her own path. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. I don't know what this means yet, but I will do my best. Alexander smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made Emily's heart flutter. I know you will, he said, and that's why I believe in you. With those words, the room seemed to shift, and Emily realized that the Alpha King wasn't just a powerful leader. He was someone who truly believed in her, someone who saw her for who she was, not just the Omega she had always been. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Emily felt like she had a place in this world, a place that wasn't just defined by her status as an Omega, but by her strength, her potential, and the possibilities that lay ahead. The days that followed were a blur for Emily. She had spent so many years in the shadows, hiding her true potential, that the sudden shift in her reality was almost overwhelming. The Alpha King's words echoed in her mind, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was truly capable of fulfilling the expectations that had been placed upon her. Was she ready to step out of the darkness and into the light? The thought both terrified and excited her. Every day, she tried to find her footing in the new world that Alexander had shown her, a world where she wasn't invisible. The palace, once a place of cold indifference, now felt like a space where she might actually belong. Yet, despite the changes, the weight of her Omega status still hung over her, a reminder of how far she had come and how much further she still had to go. Emily's encounters with Alexander had been few but meaningful. They had shared brief moments in the halls, exchanging words and glances that spoke volumes. Each time their eyes met, a silent understanding passed between them. She was beginning to realize that there was something more between them than she had first imagined. But she still had questions about herself, about him, and about what the future held. One afternoon, Emily found herself in the palace gardens, surrounded by the fragrant scent of blooming roses. The air was warm, and the soft hum of nature seemed to offer a brief respite from the chaos of her thoughts. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing mind. The weight of the decision she was facing, the choice to step into her own power, was heavy on her shoulders. You seem far away today. The voice pulled her from her thoughts, and she turned to find Alexander standing a few feet away, his gaze steady and unwavering. His presence, as always, was commanding, but there was something softer in his expression this time, something that made Emily's heart flutter. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice hesitant but sincere. "About everything you said. About me." Alexander stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "What are you thinking, Emily?" She took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she confessed, her voice shaking slightly. "I've spent my whole life hiding, staying in the background, never thinking I had the right to stand up and be seen. But now, you're asking me to believe that I'm more than just an Omega." Alexander's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to be the best version of yourself, the one I know is inside you. You have power, Emily, more than you realize, and I'm here to help you find it." His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, and for the first time, Emily felt a flicker of something deep inside her, something she hadn't known was there before. Could it be true? Could she really change her destiny? She looked up at him, her eyes searching his for any hint of insincerity. But all she saw was a quiet strength, a belief in her that she had never had in herself. "I want to believe you," she whispered, her voice full of uncertainty. Alexander smiled softly, his grip on her hand tightening ever so slightly. "Then believe in yourself," he said, his voice firm and full of conviction. "I believe in you, Emily, and I will always stand by you, no matter what." In that moment, Emily felt a shift within herself, a quiet but powerful resolve forming deep in her core. Maybe she wasn't as powerless as she had always believed. Maybe, just maybe, she had a future here, one that she could shape for herself. With Alexander by her side, she wasn't alone. And for the first time in her life, that thought didn't fill her with fear. It filled her with hope. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for believing in me." Alexander's gaze softened, and he gave her a small nod. "You don't need to thank me, Emily. You've always had this strength inside you. It's time you see it for yourself." Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. She wasn't just the Omega anymore. She was Emily Green, and she was ready to discover who she truly was. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the garden, Emily knew that her journey was only beginning. And with Alexander by her side, she would walk it with newfound strength and purpose. The days turned into weeks, and Emily began to adjust to her new reality. She still couldn't fully comprehend the shift in her life, but each passing day brought a new sense of purpose, a new sense of belonging. With Alpha King Alexander's support, she found herself more confident than she had ever been. She was no longer the forgotten Omega, dismissed and overlooked. Instead, she was starting to be seen, not just by him, but by the entire court. It was as if the veil that had always kept her in the shadows had finally been lifted. One morning, Emily found herself standing in front of the large, ornate mirror in her room, studying her reflection. Her heart still raced whenever she thought about how Alexander had believed in her, how he had seen something in her that no one else had. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do with this new sense of self, but she was determined to figure it out. She wasn't going to waste the opportunity he had given her. Just as she was about to turn away, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," she called, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. The door opened to reveal Lila, her warm smile a familiar comfort. "I thought I'd find you here," Lila said, stepping inside. "You've been quiet lately. Thinking too much again." Emily chuckled softly, turning to face her friend. "Maybe," she admitted. "It's just, I don't know what's expected of me now. Alexander believes in me, but I'm not sure what that means. I've spent my whole life hiding, and now I'm supposed to step into the light." Lila's expression softened with understanding. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Emily. Just take it one step at a time. No one expects you to change overnight. But you have something that no one else does, and that's worth something." Emily nodded, absorbing her friend's words. She had always been afraid of what would happen if she stepped out of the shadows, but maybe it was time to stop being afraid. "You're right," Emily said quietly. "It's just hard to believe that I'm more than what I've always been told I am." Lila placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are more, Emily, and you'll figure it out. But don't rush it. You've got time." Just then, Another voice interrupted their conversation. Time is a luxury we don't always have. Both women turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, his imposing presence filling the space. He looked as regal as ever, but there was something in his gaze that softened when he looked at Emily. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I need to speak with you, Emily. If you have a moment." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for another conversation with him, but she nodded, gesturing for him to enter. "Of course," she said. Alexander stepped into the room, his eyes never leaving hers. He seemed to study her for a moment before speaking again. "I've been watching you," he began, his voice low. "You've grown in ways I hadn't expected, but I can see the hesitation in you. You're still unsure of your place here, and that's understandable. But you have potential, Emily. More than you know." Emily swallowed, her throat tight. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be what you see in me." Alexander's expression softened, and he took a step closer. "You don't have to figure it all out at once," he said, his voice gentle now. "All I'm asking is that you trust yourself. Trust that you have the strength to face whatever comes next. And trust that I will be here, helping you every step of the way." His words struck a chord deep within Emily. She had spent so long doubting herself, so long believing that she was nothing more than a failure, a disappointment. But here was Alexander, a powerful leader, telling her that she was more than enough. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to try. "I'll try," she said quietly, the weight of her words sinking in. "I'll try to be the person you see in me." Alexander smiled, the warmth in his eyes reassuring her more than words ever could. "That's all I ask," he said, before turning to leave. "Take your time, Emily. But know that you are never alone." As he walked out of the room, Emily felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She wasn't just an Omega anymore. She was someone with a purpose, someone who had the potential to change everything. And with Alexander's belief in her, she knew she was ready to take the first step. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Emily felt ready to walk it with her head held high. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. Weeks passed, and Emily's confidence continued to grow with each passing day. She was no longer the timid, invisible Omega that she had once been. Every time she walked through the halls of the palace, heads turned, not with mocking laughter, but with quiet respect. The Alpha King's actions had set in motion a change within her, and she was slowly starting to believe in the possibility of a life beyond what she had always known. Still, there was a part of her that remained uncertain, a part of her that feared the unknown. The weight of her Omega status still lingered, but it was no longer the defining factor of her existence. She had learned to stand tall, to speak with a voice that carried the weight of her own worth. As the days went by, Emily found herself spending more time with Alexander. He had become more than just a king to her. He had become a mentor, a guide, someone who believed in her potential when she had not even believed in herself. His presence was both comforting and intimidating, and Emily found herself torn between gratitude and fear. One afternoon, she found herself in the palace library, her favorite place to think. The shelves were lined with books on history, politics, and magic, and the scent of old paper and leather filled the air. It was quiet here, a sanctuary where she could escape the weight of the world for a while. She was flipping through the pages of an ancient text when she heard the soft creak of the door behind her. Without turning, she knew who it was. "I thought I'd find you here." Alexander's voice echoed through the room, smooth and warm. Emily smiled softly, but did not look up. "I needed a break," she said, her fingers tracing the edge of the book. "Sometimes, I feel like I'm drowning in everything that's changing." Alexander stepped closer, his presence filling the space. "Change is never easy," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But you're handling it better than you think. Every day, I see more of the person you're becoming." Emily finally turned to face him, her heart pounding slightly. "But what if I'm not ready?" she asked, her voice betraying the doubt she had been keeping hidden. "What if I fail?" Alexander looked at her with a mix of understanding and determination. "Failure is not the end, Emily. It's just another step on the path to growth. You will make mistakes, but that doesn't mean you're not capable." He paused, his gaze intense. "I've seen what you're capable of. You don't give yourself enough credit." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had never heard anyone speak to her with such confidence. and it made her feel as though she could do anything. "You're not alone in this," Alexander added, his voice low. "I'm here to help you every step of the way, but you have to believe in yourself, too." His words were like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of her self-doubt. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she could rise to the challenges before her. She had spent so much of her life hiding from her own potential, afraid of what would happen if she stepped into the light. But now, with Alexander by her side, she felt like she might actually be able to face whatever came next. "I want to believe you," Emily said softly, her voice filled with vulnerability. "But I'm still afraid." Alexander's gaze softened, and he reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Fear is natural," he said, "but it's not something you have to face alone. I'm with you always." Emily looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she truly believed his words. She wasn't alone. She wasn't weak. She was strong, and with Alexander's belief in her, she could face whatever came next. She nodded, a sense of resolve settling within her. "I'll try," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll try to believe in myself." Alexander smiled, a rare, warm smile that made Emily's heart flutter. "That's all I ask," he said. "You're already more than you realize, Emily. You just have to see it for yourself." As he left the library, Emily stood there for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She had always been afraid of stepping into the unknown, but now, with Alexander's support, she felt ready to take the leap. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. She was ready to face it, to embrace the person she was becoming. And with that thought, she closed the book in her hands, stepping out of the shadows and into the light. The weeks passed, and Emily continued to grow more comfortable in her new role at the palace. She was still adjusting to the changes, but with each passing day, the fear that had once held her back seemed to diminish. She was no longer the silent Omega who stayed in the background, hiding from the world. Now, she was learning to step forward, to take up space, and to believe that she had something to offer. Alexander's words echoed in her mind every day. He believed in her, and that belief had started to fuel something deep inside her. As she walked through the palace corridors, Emily noticed how the eyes of the other wolves followed her now. It was no longer with scorn or disdain, but with a measure of respect. She had earned it, even if it still felt surreal at times. She wasn't the same person she had been just a few months ago. One afternoon, Emily found herself in the palace garden again, the same place where she had had her conversation with Alexander weeks before. It was her place of quiet reflection, where she could clear her mind and think. Today, the air was cooler than usual, a soft breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. The roses in the garden were still in full bloom, their sweet scent filling the air, but Emily's thoughts were elsewhere. She had been spending a lot of time reflecting on her path forward. The pressure to prove herself weighed on her sometimes, but she was determined not to let it hold her back. Just then, a familiar voice broke her thoughts. "You seem lost in thought," Lila said, her tone playful but kind as she stepped into the garden. Emily turned to find her friend walking toward her, a warm smile on her face. "Just thinking," Emily replied, offering a small smile in return. "About everything, really." Lila raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight in Emily's voice. "Everything? Sounds like a lot. What's on your mind?" Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing," she admitted. "I'm starting to believe in myself, but sometimes it feels like I'm not enough. Like I'm just pretending to be something I'm not." Lila's smile softened, and she placed a reassuring hand on Emily's arm. "You are enough," she said firmly. "And you're not pretending. You're becoming. There's a big difference." Emily looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes making her feel a little lighter. "I want to believe that," she said quietly. "But sometimes it's hard to shake the doubts." Lila nodded, her expression understanding. "Doubts are normal, especially when you're trying something new. But you've already come so far, Emily. You've shown yourself and everyone else what you're capable of. And if you need more time to figure things out, that's okay too." Emily's heart felt lighter with her friend's words. Lila had always been there for her, offering kindness and wisdom when Emily needed it most. "I guess I'm just scared," Emily admitted. "What if I fail? What if I can't live up to what Alexander believes in me?" Lila smiled warmly. "Then you try again. And again, if you have to. But trust me, Emily, you're not alone in this. You have people who believe in you. You have Alexander, but you also have me, and you have yourself. The words hit Emily in a way that nothing else had. She had been so focused on her fears, her doubts, that she had forgotten to acknowledge how far she had already come. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived at the palace. She had strength now, strength she had discovered within herself, with a little help from the people around her. Just as she was about to reply, the sound of footsteps approaching interrupted them. Both women turned to see Alexander walking toward them, his presence filling the space. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his voice calm, though his eyes were focused on Emily. She stood up straighter, feeling the familiar rush of nerves, but also something else, confidence. "No, not at all," Emily replied, her voice steady. "We were just talking." Alexander nodded, his gaze softening as he approached. "Good," he said with a slight smile. "I wanted to check in with you, Emily. You've been making great strides, and I wanted to make sure you're not pushing yourself too hard." Emily looked at him, surprised by his concern. "I'm doing okay," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "But sometimes it's hard to balance everything. The expectations, the changes. I'm still figuring it out." Alexander's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his presence soothing. "That's normal," he said gently. "You're not expected to have it all figured out right away. But I want you to remember one thing. No matter what, I believe in you." Emily's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't have all the answers. But with the support of those who believed in her, she was ready to face whatever came next. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "I won't let you down." Alexander smiled, his gaze warm and reassuring. "I know you won't," he said. "You're already doing more than you realize." And as Emily stood there, with the warm sun shining down on her and Alexander by her side, she knew that this was just the beginning. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she was ready to embrace it with confidence and hope. The following weeks brought Emily a sense of calm she hadn't known before. She had started to trust herself more, stepping into her new role with growing confidence. The shadows of doubt that once loomed over her seemed to shrink with every passing day, though there were still moments of uncertainty. But with the Alpha King's support, she felt like she was on the right path, even when the journey ahead seemed daunting. She spent her days working alongside Alexander, learning from him and observing how he navigated the intricacies of leadership. His guidance was invaluable, but what stood out most to Emily was how he never treated her as just an Omega. He saw her as a capable, strong individual, someone who could make a difference. It was a feeling Emily had never experienced before, and it was something she cherished deeply. One evening, after a long day of training and meetings, Alexander invited Emily to join him for a walk in the palace gardens. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over everything. The peaceful sound of the fountain filled the air, and the scent of blooming flowers surrounded them. It was a welcome reprieve from the stress of the day, and Emily felt a sense of tranquility wash over her. "You've been doing well," Alexander said, his voice calm but filled with admiration. "I've seen a real change in you." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with warmth at his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm starting to believe in myself." Alexander turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "That's all I wanted for you. To see your own potential." They continued walking in silence for a few moments, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet garden. Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of peace whenever she was near Alexander. His presence was both calming and invigorating, as if he somehow made her feel like anything was possible. As they reached the far end of the garden, where a large oak tree stood, Alexander stopped and looked at Emily with a soft, almost unreadable expression. "I've been meaning to tell you something," he began, his tone serious. "You've proven to me, and to everyone else, that you are more than just an Omega. You are someone who can stand on her own." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "I've always felt like I was just the Omega," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now, I don't know. I feel like I'm something more. Something stronger." Alexander gave her a small smile, a rare expression that made her heart flutter. "You've always been strong, Emily. It just took you a while to realize it." The sincerity in his words made Emily feel something she had never allowed herself to feel before: hope. For the first time, she could truly see herself in a new light. She wasn't just the weak Omega, the one who had always been overlooked. She was someone who had the strength to make a difference, someone who could shape her own future. Alexander's voice broke through her thoughts. "There's something else I want you to know," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "I believe in you, Emily. And not just as an Omega, but as a person. You've shown me that you have the courage and the heart to do great things. And I will be here, every step of the way, to help you." Emily's heart swelled at his words. She had never felt so seen, so understood. It was more than just the belief he had in her. It was the way he made her believe in herself. She nodded, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "Thank you, Alexander. I don't think I could do this without you." He smiled warmly, a gesture that felt like a promise. "You'll never have to do it alone." The moment hung in the air, and for the first time in her life, Emily felt like she truly belonged. She had found her place in this world, not defined by her Omega status, but by her own strength and potential. And with Alexander by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun sank lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the garden, and Emily realized that this was just the beginning of her journey. She had come so far, but the road ahead was still full of possibilities. And with each step she took, she knew she was becoming the person she was always meant to be.